Hello, everyone. Welcome to Wind Down Wednesdays. I'm your host, Paula Taylor, and this is episode 171. So I'm going to be really honest. I almost made this episode a bonus episode because those can only be seen by the members of my Spiritual Integration Sanctuary community because I feel really vulnerable telling the story that goes with this topic. But then I realized it's a really important topic, and it's not exactly a 3D, 5D energy update. It's more of an understanding I came to that I think is really helpful, that I haven't heard many people speak of in this way. So I'm going to tell this really vulnerable story that makes my 3D self uncomfortable in order to serve the 5D collective of this divine source energy expansion into unconditional love. So I'm already stalling. Let's see. And I will say, sometimes when I tell a story, like sometimes I just tell you the story and then we talk about kind of what came through it afterwards. Sometimes I tell it with hindsight and I kind of give you my later interpretation while I'm telling it. And I was going back and forth, like, how do I tell this story? How do I illustrate this point? And I think I'm just going to tell you the story and then give you the realization as I had it. And then we'll discuss a little bit about what I've processed since then and what this means. And for me, this feels like a really pivotal moment. And everybody I've been working with over the last couple of weeks is really dealing with this in a different way. It might be the specifics I'm going to give you they're pretty specific, but the overall idea of this applies to everyone. And there's a reason why the energy has been feeling really heavy and really chaotic. It is because we are being asked to look at this, asked to understand the nuance of this transition. So I'm going to stop stalling and just tell you my story. And I haven't had a chance to tell my friend this story yet, and she listens to the podcast, so this may be the first time she's hearing this. So my dog's hitting and somebody's barking. This is the energy of this week. So I haven't had a chance to tell my friend this story yet, so this may be the first time she hears this because I know she listens to the podcast. So about a month or so ago, one of my friends texted me and she said, hey, the TV show The Voice is holding virtual open call auditions. And I was like, oh, that's weird. That's interesting. And so I looked it up, or she had sent me a link. I can't remember. And we were texting back and forth and kind of jokingly talking about like what songs we would sing and you know, whether we were going to do this. And it was kind of this idea of, I had just left my medical job and like she was in a different situation but kind of similar, and it was like, oh, wouldn't it be lovely if we could just like become superstars and not have to worry about money and, you know, all of that kind of stuff. And I thought about it enough to the point where I kind of went to the website and started putting some information in, because right away I was like, oh, this would be a really interesting place to go in, not to sing a song, but to share dimensional frequency expansion and see what kind of a response it got, which is my channeled quantum sound and energy healing method that comes from the angelic realm. And I got to the intellectual property release and I was like, oh no, because essentially anything you do as any part of that show, they own the rights to. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that, because this is not something that I'm going to just give away in order to be on TV. And honestly, I didn't really, even that, I was just like, no, I'm not going to do that. I was just like, no, I'm not going to do that. And I went on vacation for a week and I came back and I forgot all about it. It was just like a funny little thing that happened. And I kind of texted her at one point. I'm like, oh, did you end up doing it? And she's like, no, I didn't end up doing it. And I kind of forgot all about it. So then after I got back, I was starting to focus on this trip that I'm taking to Cambodia and just seeing clients and just doing my thing. And then I got this email kind of out of nowhere, and it was like, new dates for the virtual open call, whatever it's called, virtual open call auditions for The Voice. And I was like, oh, it's back. And a lot of times when something leaves your field and then comes back, it's because you're supposed to look at it. And as soon as I kind of looked at that and I had this like, oh, it's back feeling, like, I heard one of my archangels say, you need to do this. You need to sign up for this and do this. And I was like, I don't want to do this. And I already had decided I couldn't share dimensional frequency expansion. But right away it came through. It was like, this is your opportunity to share this energy. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to tell them what it is. You could sing just any kind of song. Well, not any kind of song, we'll get into that, but you could sing just a regular song. And I do that at the end of the DFE activations, at the end of sound journeys. I usually sing in English, and my guides have told me that it's a way to kind of seal the energy into this physical plane. So they were like, you need to do this. And I was like, I don't want to do this. And they said, it's a way for you to bring this energy into this space and just allow it to be seen. And right away they were like, if they don't select you, it's not about you. It's not a judgment of you. It's about the energy. And essentially they're like, this is a chance to test kind of the mainstream and see if this energy is ready to be received on a much larger scale. And so I did the thing I do where I was kind of arguing and I was like, no, I don't really want to do this. But they were very insistent. And part of me, even through this, has been a little bit like, were they playing a prank on me because it took me so long to quit my job? They were telling me to quit my medical job for almost a year before I finally did it. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to trust you. I don't have any stake in this. I don't actually really even want to do it, but I'm going to go in and play. That's how it felt. The archangels have been very playful this month, which is funny because for us, the energy's been really heavy and chaotic, but their energy comes through very playful. And they keep telling, the message that keeps coming through for almost everyone, including for me, is have more fun, find play. That is definitely a 5D expansion, is kind of lightening some of the density by having more fun, by having more play. So they were like, just play with this. You're not doing this to get on the show necessarily, you're doing this to introduce this energy, and you do it with that intention. And so I was like, and at first I was like, oh yeah, that's super playful and I won't take this seriously at all. And I kind of picked a song based on something my friend had said. And then that vibration didn't feel quite right. The words of the song needed to match the vibration because they wanted me to send Reiki and specifically kind of emerald frequency, which is that heart opener. It's kind of the introduction into DFE. And they're like, the words of the song matter. You have to choose a song with words that support this emerald frequency. So one of the songs I sometimes sing at the end of a sound journey is Pure Imagination from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. And they're like, that's a perfect song to sing. And right away I was like, that's not a great, there's not a lot of range, vocally, it's not really going to demonstrate, it's not going to get me on the show, essentially. And they were like, that doesn't matter. You're doing this to serve the energy. And so I was like, okay. And I kind of just was like, I signed up for a spot and I was like, I guess I'm doing this. I didn't tell almost anybody at first. I was very embarrassed about this. And I realized as I went through this kind of what was coming up and why, and we'll get into that. But I told just a couple of people and I was like, this is just a thing I'm going to do. I have all these other things going on. I'm getting ready to go on this big trip. I'll just do this on the day. But then they were like, you need to take this seriously. You need to really do this. You need to show up and you need to practice. You need to know what you're going to say. You need to say something about what you do. You need to say something about sound healing. You need to go on and say that something about the power of sound for healing and specifically the power of your own voice. And I was like, all right, well, can I just channel that? And they're like, well, you're going to be nervous. You need to practice. So I really did, I prepared, I practiced the song. I kind of practiced about what I was going to say. And an interesting thing happened on the way to this audition over the last week and a half or so, I think 2 weeks maybe since I signed up. All of this old stuff started coming up. All of this old stuff about performing. I have a degree in music. I've talked about some of these things. I actually lost my voice. I had nodules on my vocal cords when I was in high school, and it changed my voice. The quality of my voice is no longer as clear as it used to be, probably because there's some scarring on my vocal cords. And I had this really fraught relationship with expression and with my voice for a long time. I was born singing. That's kind of the joke. I sang before I talked. And there was something about me at an early age where I knew my voice was my gift and I knew I was meant to share it. And I shared it freely without any shame, without any worry about judgment. And as my ego began to develop, all of this baggage started coming through. All of this programming started coming through about seeking approval and about being perfect and about being seen. When I was young and I sang, it didn't feel like it was about people watching me. It felt like it was about people receiving what I was offering, probably more energetically, although I definitely didn't have the words for that. As I got older and I kind of started to hit puberty and I had a lot of body image stuff coming up, it was like, in order to sing, you need to be seen. Like, even in church, you're standing up in front of everyone and they're looking at you. And so I started to all of that stuff started to get shut down, and it started to become more about performance. And even at a fairly early age, like, I used to love Star Search, and that was my dream. That was my 3D dream. I wanted to go on Star Search and like be seen and, hopefully win and get like famous or whatever. But even that started coming out of that performance stuff. Like, it's like, and people get addicted to performance. There's endorphins that come when you perform and you get this interaction with the audience and they cheer for you. And, it's kind of dangerous, honestly. And it's always interesting to me. And when I bring this up, I get weird looks, but it is not a surprise to me that so many famous singers end up dying in tragic ways through taking their own life, through drugs, through alcohol, whatever it is. It's not an easy place to live. And from an ego perspective, it's a real shaky place to live, because if you are building your self-worth on the approval of other people are fickle. The world is, you might be a big star for a while and then maybe you're not as much. And it's like counting on a drug, and you need more and more and more of it to kind of fill that need, because you're filling a spiritual hole with a non-spiritual thing, which is the approval of other people. Little tangent there. So as I got more into this like performance ego-based space, I got more and more uncomfortable performing, to the point that I stopped singing altogether. I lost my voice in high school. Physically, I couldn't sing. I went into college. I didn't want to be seen. I didn't like performing. I got stage fright. It got worse and worse and worse, to the point where it kind of culminated in this experience in my senior recital where I was playing the oboe, and it was the emptiest I ever felt after I played that performance. And it was a good performance. Everybody was like, that was so amazing. It was wonderful. All I could see were the mistakes I made. All I could think about was how I looked on stage. All I could think about was it wasn't enough to fill this like hole inside of me. And I realized that it was never going to, and that I was looking in the wrong place. And that was actually a pretty pivotal point in my spiritual journey. I was already on a spiritual journey, but it was a point at which I realized, like, oh, I'm never going to be good enough to receive enough approval from other people that it is going to make me feel good about myself. So I'm going to have to figure out why I don't feel good about myself and like how to heal that. So that kind of long backstory, just to say, like, all of that stuff came up when I was preparing for this audition, which I was doing because my guides asked me to. I went back and forth about what to call this episode. I think I'm calling it Trusting Your 5D Path, and we're going to talk a little bit about 3D and 5D and how this relates. I'm going to get to the point where I had this realization. But over the course of like coming into this with like a playful attitude and what I might call like a more 5D attitude of just expansion and sharing this energy and having fun with it, I was kind of sucked back into this denser 3D stuff of, how do I look? How do I present to people? Am I perfect? Is my tone perfect? Am I perfect in my pitch? Am I singing enough notes? Like, it all came back to this like space of judgment and being judged, and really was really messing with me. It was really messing with my head. And, but I was committed to doing it. I had signed up. I had promised my guides I would do it. That's one of the things, trusting your 5D path. This felt like part of my 5D journey. And I was like, I don't understand how any of this fits together. It felt like there were two totally separate things going on. Like, I was being asked to channel energy, which is something I do all the time, in kind of a weird space where it was like especially vulnerable and possibly going to be received by way more people than maybe it usually is. But that felt like a possible opening to kind of expanding what I've been doing, which is something that I trust is meant to happen, and that this was part of that. I do trust that. But at the same time, there was all of this like doubt and worth and how do I look and how old am I? And like all of this stuff was coming up. And again, perfection in the performance. And what if I miss a note? And what if my voice cracks? And, I'm going to be judged by people. And then like, what if I actually get called back? And then I have to like try to bring this 5D energy into this 3D space. Essentially, I'm getting ahead of myself, but that's essentially what I felt like I was being asked to do. If I actually had to go in and like be in this space, how do I go into this space in this and preserve my own expansion? And so it was really messing with me. It was really bringing up a lot of stuff. And I did this audition yesterday. So I was literally on the way to, they told me to do it in my office, in my treatment room with all my bowls behind me. They wanted all the energy of that space to kind of be coming through this transmission. My guides were all about the energy the whole time. And I was just like, oh, what am I doing? And what if I mess up? And I kept telling my husband, like, I'm going to make a fool of myself. And he's like, I'm sure it'll be fine. And I had this like mental image of being in the like clip of the people who like think they can sing and they can't, it was all of that kind of stuff. And I got up yesterday morning and I did a really beautiful tones practice because I knew I needed to get into the spiritual space in order to do what I was being asked to do, which was do this in an energetic way and not in a performance way. But even right up to when I was going over to get set up and prepare for this, I was really in that 3D space. I was in the doubt. And this is when I got ahead of myself a little bit and gave away the realization a little bit. But I was driving over there and it was like I had like one of those bolt of lightning moments where I was like, oh. And ever since then, I've been processing this. And so now I have a lot more to say about it. But I was in the car and I was driving there. And I was chanting and kind of like calling in the dimensional frequencies and just trying to get out of this because I was in a really dysregulated state. I was in a very dysregulated nervous system state because I was very nervous and I was afraid I was going to mess up and I was afraid I was going to make an idiot of myself, all of that stuff. I was really in that space, that 3D space. And that's when it hit me. That's when the 3D and 5D part came in. And I was like, oh, all of this ego stuff that's coming up, this is the 3D, but the 3D is actually contained within the 5D. The 5D is just an expansion from the 3D. And the first image I got, and I think I've mentioned this before, was kind of like an overlay, like the 5D is like lying on top of the 3D. But the problem with that, and we'll get into that more, is that even within that, there's this hierarchical view of like ascension. And we use the word ascension, and I sometimes do because it's a word we've decided to use, just like 3D and 5D. But there's this idea of like raising up. And there's also this idea of like you can get out of the 3D. And that's not the case because the physical plane is 3D. 5D is not a physical space. It's a vibration. So all of a sudden, as I was driving over to my office to do this audition, this like bolt of lightning hit. And I was like, oh, so I'm in the 3D right now, the 3D energy of what this space is. It's literally a show about judgment. And it's so funny that I ended up doing this because I use that show as an example when I talk to people about using your voice for healing. I use that show as an example of what not to do. You are not trying to get someone to turn their chair around for you and tell you that you're good. It doesn't matter what your voice sounds like when you're using your voice for healing, which is a 5D construct. It doesn't matter what your voice sounds like. It doesn't matter how pretty it is. It doesn't matter what the pitch is. It matters that you're tapping into this vibration that allows for expansion. And so as I was driving down the road, I was like, oh, wait a minute. The 3D is within the 5D. So the image that's coming to me now is kind of like two spheres. So the 3D is like the center sphere and it's very dense. It's the physical plane. The 5D is the expansion around that space. And so all of a sudden I realized, first of all, not only is it's just a small vibrational shift away. It feels like a huge leap to us a lot of times. To get from the 3D to the 5D, it was like I need to get out of the space of judgment of myself and into this space of unconditional love, of channeling divine energy, which is what I was being asked to do. And I was like, well, I can do that. I know how to do that to the best of my ability. I mean, I'll talk about the actual audition because it's pretty cool, actually. But I was like, I can get out of that space. I know how to do that. I know how to shift my vibration. It's the whole thing I do. That is what I do, is work with vibration, work with energy, work with frequency, work with sound. But also, I realized that I could actually be in both places at the same time. And this is the most important realization here, because even I have been thinking about this 3D to 5D shift as like an all or nothing. It's one or the other. It's one or the other. And eventually they're going to move apart to the point where you can't get from one to the other. And I think there is some truth to that, because I think at a certain point, the vibration is so expanded that you really have to shrink down to get back into that like denser vibration. But also, the denser vibration never fully leaves our system. I think even I have had this idea that like at a certain point, I'm going to arrive in this place where I let go of my density and I'm all expansion all the time. Even though I say over and over again that that's not what we're going for, this was like a visceral realization for me that I can hold all of this 3D stuff, the fear of being judged, the fear of how I look, the fear of how I sound, the fear of my pitch, all of that boils down to the fear of being judged, the fear of being unworthy. I can hold all of that in this dense little kind of inner sphere and still expand and embody the energy of the 5D, of the expansion, of the unconditional love. I can choose to focus on this expansion and allow for the 3D to continue to exist, because it's going to, because we're not leaving our bodies. And the 5D is not a physical state. It is a vibrational state. So we're staying in 3D bodies. Now looking back, I'm like, oh, it makes total sense to me that like we are actually in both places at the same time. So just to finish the story out, and then we'll kind of go back into the 3D, 5D thing, but this is kind of fun and cool. So by the time I got to the office, I was back in that vibration of 5D and the vibration of like, let's just play with this. Like, probably no one's going to know what to make of this, and like, that's okay. It's an introduction. It's like going into a really dense space with the super expanded energy, and maybe no one's going to understand you, but something about just introducing that energy to the space could fundamentally alter how the space works. And I think that is what those of us who are in this 5D and leading the shift, we're going to be doing a lot of that. So I got to the office and I set everything up and I called in like everybody. I called in the dimensional frequencies, which are seraphim, they're angelic frequencies. So I've had this team of 50 archangels around me since I had this big trauma release a couple weeks ago. I think 2 weeks ago. Anyway, so I had a small team of archangels at one point. They were working on stuff. They came back and they brought like 50 friends. So I've had this like circle of 50 archangels around me. And one of the interesting things, this is a little bit of a weird hierarchical thing, but in this instance, it was really cool. So when the seraphim energy is in a space, the archangels bow to that energy. And it's not a bow like I'm lesser than you, because sometimes I tell people this and then I get like this from people. It's more of like namaste. Like I bow, the divine in me bows to the divine in you. And because the seraphim hold the physical space of source, they are the closest thing to source that we can experience in the physical. And so when their energy comes into a space, the archangels bow. It's like, just like with reverence. And so as I called the seraphim, they usually don't leave the angelic realm, but I have this like mechanism now where I can bring them down. So I brought them down into the space, and 50 archangels all like took a knee and bowed. And the experience of it felt like a mandala. And I was like, I feel like I could reproduce this. It was like this semicircle of like all of these angels bowing. It was really, really, really cool. And then I called in all Reiki masters, past and present, who wanted to assist with this experience, just like I would in a Reiki attunement. And then I called in the Mintakan elders to bring extra unconditional love, and partly to help soothe me, because I was still holding the 3D fear around judgment and having to do this anyway. And I called in the Pleiadians to bring in some extra play and light. And I called in the Arcturians to kind of bring in some structure to hold all this energy. And let me tell you that this space was on fire with vibration. it was so intense and so amazing. And so you had 90 seconds. So I did my little thing. I introduced myself. I said, one of the reasons I'm here is to help people recognize the power of sound for healing, and especially the power of your own voice. I sang my little snippet of my song, and then I sent it. And first of all, I was like super relieved to just be done with it. In the 3D, I was like, oh, good, that's over. But I was so elevated and expanded by this experience that I could not stop laughing. I could not stop smiling. Some of it was relief, but some of it was just the intensity of the energy in this space, the intensity of this expanded 5D unconditional love of source. And I never had to let go of the 3D stuff. I was nervous. My voice was shaking a little bit when I was singing, especially when I got to the end. For some reason, that always happens. I start out fine, I get to the end, and I'm like, oh, I'm really doing this. Like, the 3D stuff was there. It was contained within the 5D, but I was not focused on the trauma. I was not focused on the heaviness. I was not focused on the fear. I was not focused on the feeling of unworthiness, the worry about judgment. I was focused on the expansion. And I realized that I could be in both places at the same time, and that in fact, that is how we will affect change in the 3D, is to continually come into these 3D spaces that are built on hierarchies, on ladders, on judgment, on somebody winning a contest, on competition. And we come in with this beautiful round circle of 5D. There's room for everyone. There's a piece of the pie for everyone. No one is better than everyone else or anyone else. No one is better than any one person. We are all equal. We all have something to contribute, and together we can build something so much greater than this idea of one person winning a contest. So right after that, I had a client come in shortly after that. I was about an hour later, and I was like, hey, the energy in my treatment room is like amazing. Let's do an activation. And they were a very good sport because we do different types of things. And they're like, yeah, let's do it. And at the end, what they said to me, they used the word transformative. That was transformative. And during that whole session, I was like, this is what I'm here to do. Like, not, I can introduce 5D energy into the 3D, but I'm not here to try to shift the energy of a 3D space from within the 3D. It doesn't really work. It's not really going to work. And so perhaps unsurprisingly, when I looked at my email at the end of the day, I had a short little message that said, thank you for your participation. You will not be moving on to the next round. And I actually laughed out loud. I was like, and I sent a text to my husband and I said, oh, they rejected me, like with a bunch of laughing faces, because I really felt the playful aspect of this whole thing. And that the 3D part of it, it's this small little dense thing that's still there. It's not going away yet. Maybe eventually we'll all get expanded so that the 3D feels more like the 5D. That's the goal. But like that space can be there, that fear can be there, that doubt can be there, and I can choose to expand anyway. I can choose to hold both of those spaces. I can choose to say, yep, I am terrified. My dog is making a bunch of noise. Sorry about that in the background. I can choose to say, yes, I am terrified. Yes, I am worried about judgment. Yes, I am judging myself. Yes, I am feeling unworthy. And I am going to choose to expand anyway. I'm going to get into this expanded space. And I will say, just to finish the story, I was so worried about telling this story. And now again, I'm like just in this like space of the joy of it. I did get home last night and the 3D stuff kind of hit me and I was like, oh, I got rejected and like, but I also know that I did exactly what was asked of me. Now I'm going to get emotional. I trusted my guides. I did what they asked me to do. I held that expanded 5D. It was beyond 5. It was like a 12D. It was like it was source space. I held the space of source. And I sent, as I was singing, I was sending Reiki just like I do on these transmissions in the meditations. For those who can see the video, sometimes you can see me holding my hands up or moving my hands. The whole time I was singing, I was sending Reiki through the transmission, sending energy. I was calling in the emerald frequency through my voice, which I do on the activations I record, on some of the music I record. So I did exactly what was asked of me, and I trusted my 5D path. That's where we're finally getting to the title of this episode. And there was a lot of me that didn't want to do that. There was a huge part of me who just wanted to say, this is not the space for me. These people aren't going to be able to hear what I'm sharing. And again, I could have gone way more 3D with it, and I could have brought in accompaniment, and I could have played the piano, and I could have sung something that was much more difficult, but that's not what I was there for. Because that space of hierarchy, of judgment, does not serve this expansion. And there's nothing wrong with a little fun and healthy competition, but our entire society is built on that hierarchy. And so as I've been processing this, even through this morning, and thinking about this whole 3D versus 5D thing, I realized, like, I probably had no hope to come into that space with that much expanded energy and have it be received, because it's a space that's not built for that. It's that ladder of kind of pulling yourself up, and a lot of times pushing someone else down. So the whole point of that, and I have to tell, that's the other thing, I haven't ever even watched a whole episode of The Voice. I know the premise and I've seen like snippets of it, but essentially all of those shows, just like any of those shows, American Idol, all of those like competition shows, my husband likes to watch cooking shows, somebody's got to win, right? And so the buy-in for people who are watching it, you know, is that you get attached to your person and you want them to win. But that's a 3D construct. The idea that only one person is going to win something is absolutely a 3D construct. And the 5D construct is that there is space for everyone. There is space for everyone to achieve. There is space for everyone to expand. There is space for everyone to work together. And like, what if they reorganize the show? Instead of like having one winner, they just picked 20 people and they all got to make music together. Like, that would be the 5D construct. I mean, you're still picking people out of like a group, but like the idea of this shift is, first of all, it's an internal shift, which I've been talking about for a while. And second of all, it's a vibrational shift. It's not a place. It's not a permanent state of being. That's the other thing, this idea that you're going to permanently be in 5D, because that leads to more judgment. And we talked about that on last week's show. These people who are in this spiritual space, who are still in a space of judgment, and they're saying things like, you know, oh, well, I'm in the 5D, and oh, well, I have to like leave all these people behind, and blah, 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 blah. None of that is really a 5D construct. Now, nuanced point here, when you choose expansion, sometimes people do leave your field because there is the idea of coherence or harmony. So when we are vibrating at different frequencies, we produce different pitches. I'm going to use musical terms for this. So, you know, A vibrates in classical music at 440. That's another whole thing about 440 versus 432. But so an A vibrates at 440, and all the other notes are seen in relative to that pitch. So if I'm playing an A and a B flat or an A sharp, that sounds kind of dissonant. Those frequencies aren't going together. The actual wavelengths are not lining up in coherence. They're sort of crossing each other, and they're creating these physical beats that you can hear in the music that I was trained in classical music to get rid of in order to be quote unquote perfect. And in sound healing, we call those binaural beats, and we know that they actually can be healing. So when you're thinking about this idea of like, as you expand, yes, sometimes people do leave your frequency. Sometimes you do have to set boundaries with people. You do have to ask people to leave your frequency. And that is just about coherence. But that can be done without judgment. That can be done with love. That can be done in a space of holding both vibrations at the same time. I recognize that you are struggling in a dense vibration at this particular time in your life, and I love you, and I have been there, and I am choosing to expand even while I still have that vibration. And that's, I think, where this big realization came to me, is that it's not an either or thing, because that's actually a 3D construct. This idea of black and white, all or nothing, either or, that is part of that ladder, part of that hierarchy, part of that box. We are moving into a round space. And in a round space, there is much more room for inclusion. Now, does that mean that everyone in your round space is in the same, like, you could think of it as like the rings of Saturn. Not everybody's on the same ring as you are, and that's okay. Everybody's vibrating at a different frequency. Just because somebody leaves your field doesn't mean that you get to judge them for it. It doesn't mean that you get to say, well, I'm in 5D and they're in 3D, so yeah, because again, that is a 3D construct. Judgment is a 3D construct, and it is so hard to let go of because it is internalized. And this whole experience that I just had really helped me see how much self-judgment I still have, how much I'm still tying my self-worth to how I look, to how I sound, to how I present myself to others, and also to be okay with that. And also to just say, you know what? I may never let go of that completely, but as long as I'm aware that it's there, I can choose a different vibration. I always say we want all the vibrations. When people say high vibe versus low vibe, it's one of my pet peeves, because I always say if you listen to your favorite song with the bass all the way down, something's going to be missing. We want all the vibrations, and the lower vibrations tend to be denser. But we can look for clarity, expansion, and harmony on all those levels, and we can also cut ourselves some slack and recognize we are 3D beings in a 3D reality in this physical body as humans, and we are choosing to evolve into something that is a more expanded vibration, that is clearer, that is more harmonious, that is more expanded. There is space for both, and the either or thing I do not think is serving us. I think that's part of the shift, is getting to this point where it's like, oh, wait a minute, like there's room for the 3D within the 5D, because we can't get rid of the 3D because we are 3D beings. Okay. I felt like I was, that felt a little soapboxy, so I hope that didn't come across as judgmental, because I'm human and I have that, and I am also setting the intention to expand into an unconditionally loving space. And that doesn't mean that space doesn't have boundaries. That may be next week's show. I thought that was going to be this week's show, but this was really topical and felt really important, and I wanted to get this information out there. So if you enjoy the show, if you enjoy the content and you want more of it, you can join the Spiritual Integration Sanctuary to receive all of the bonus episodes, to be able to watch the video versions of the show, and also to participate in the full-length meditation and activation that goes along with these full-length shows. We would love to have you. We are exploring creating a 5D space without knowing exactly what that means or what that looks like, and it's a really loving, supportive space to explore these topics that we talk about on the show. Thank you so much for joining me today. Know that every single part of you is deserving of love. You don't have to earn that love by releasing all your density, by fully expanding all the time. You get to have all of those parts of yourself and choose to shift vibration and choose to expand without having to earn that in any way. Have a beautiful rest of your day or evening, and I will see you on the next episode of Wind Down Wednesdays.